Sienna leaned closer, her voice now a whisper only Kyra could hear. "You don't belong here. This school doesn't need your kind lowering the curve. Go back to wherever it is your type comes from." Kyra's body went still. Every part of her screamed to lash out, to say something, to fight. Sienna didn't realize that she had chosen the wrong person to bully. And Sienna had no idea how close that storm was to breaking. And now, she was about to pay a heavy price for it. A quiet breeze swept through the streets of Summit Ridge, a small town nestled in the heart of Colorado. The yellow school bus came to a stop in front of Summit Ridge High School, its brakes hissing softly. Students poured out in a noisy rush, chattering and laughing as they made their way toward the red brick building. But one girl moved differently. Kyra Thompson, a 17-year-old African-American girl, stepped down from the bus last. She clutched the straps of her backpack tightly, her eyes scanning the unfamiliar campus with quiet caution. Her shoes touched the pavement as though it were sacred ground, new, foreign, and possibly hostile. Kyra didn't say a word. She had no intention of making friends. No desire to be noticed. Her only goal was to finish her senior year peacefully and get out. The towering facade of Summit Ridge High, 3 stories of aging brick and faded windows, looked like every other school she had been transferred to in the last 3 years. With each move, Kyra had learned something vital. Survival meant silence. Don't speak unless necessary. Don't draw attention. Don't push back. She moved into the flow of students entering the main building, keeping her steps light and her shoulders low, making sure not to brush against anyone. Her deep brown eyes avoided every glance thrown her way, but that didn't stop the stares. Curious ones. Cautious ones. And others full of quiet judgment. Kyra knew those looks. She'd seen them in Texas. She'd seen them in Oregon. Now she was seeing them in Colorado. Being the only black girl in a sea of predominantly white faces meant she was always an anomaly. People didn't always say it out loud, but their body language spoke volumes. "You don't belong here." As she entered the hallway, her senses heightened. The smell of polished floors and cheap cafeteria food mixed with the low hum of locker doors slamming shut and teachers calling out from classrooms. Everything felt the same as before, almost comforting in its predictability. But Kyra didn't let that familiarity fool her. She knew better than to feel safe. She pulled out a small piece of paper from her jacket pocket, squinting at the locker number scribbled on it, number 2317. Row after row of sky blue lockers lined the main hallway, each identical except for the worn metal numbers etched on top. Kyra walked past them, scanning quietly. The hallway was busy, shoulder-to-shoulder traffic of teenagers joking and shouting, but Kyra moved as though she were invisible. Almost like a shadow drifting between bodies. And then, the atmosphere shifted. Conversations dipped into hushes. A sudden gap formed in the crowd behind her. The space cleared like ripples around a stone dropped in water. Kyra didn't need to turn around to know why. She could feel the presence before it arrived. Heavy. Cold. Controlled. From behind, a voice sliced through the tension like a scalpel. "She's new," it said, casual, confident, dangerous. Out of the corner of her eye, Kyra caught a glimpse of Sienna Blake. Sienna was tall, white, and unmistakably powerful. Her platinum blonde hair curled in perfect waves that framed her flawless face like it had been styled for a magazine shoot. Her oversized Letterman jacket clung effortlessly to her shoulders, signaling her status as both a cheer captain and the queen bee of Summit Ridge High. But it wasn't Sienna alone that commanded attention. Flanking her were 2 shadows, Delaney and Paige. Delaney, red-haired and razor-tongued, had a talent for slicing through people with her words. Paige, quieter but observant, was a walking database of school secrets. Together, they were untouchable. And yet, it was the presence of Jace Blake, Sienna's older brother and Summit Ridge's golden boy, that sealed the group's reign. 6'2", linebacker broad, and perpetually dressed in his number 22 football jersey, Jace was the crown jewel of the school. His popularity made him untouchable, and his loyalty to Sienna made anyone who crossed her a target. Kyra didn't flinch. Even when Sienna's sharp green eyes locked onto hers assessing, calculating, Kyra kept her head down and continued unlocking her locker. Her fingers worked with quiet precision, but inside, a storm was brewing. A storm she had buried deep under years of restraint and silence. She hadn't even memorized her locker combination yet, and already, she'd been marked. A quiet sigh escaped her lips. She had hoped, perhaps foolishly, that this school might be different. That she could slip through the year like smoke, unseen, untouched, and unbothered. But the moment Sienna Blake had noticed her, that possibility was gone. Kyra closed her locker and adjusted the straps of her backpack. She didn't look at Sienna again. Didn't speak. Just walked to her first class. But she knew. This was only the beginning. Something told her that no amount of silence would keep her safe here. Not from the whispers. Not from the eyes. And certainly not from Sienna Blake. And yet, there was also something else stirring in her chest, something she hadn't felt in a long time. A quiet fire. One that whispered, "You've been here before. And you're still standing." Kyra sat in the back corner of her first period classroom, her posture composed but slightly withdrawn. The teacher, Mrs. Elkins, called attendance while the rest of the students filed in, filling the room with the soft shuffling of sneakers and quiet murmurs of half-finished conversations. No one spoke to her. No one sat near her. Even though there were 2 empty seats beside Kyra, students chose to squeeze into tighter spots rather than take a place next to the quiet girl with deep brown skin and braided hair. And Kyra understood. She always understood. Because this wasn't the first time it had happened. In every school, the pattern was the same. They didn't need to say it out loud. The message was always delivered through body language, through prolonged stares, through the questions that never came and the greetings that never arrived. She didn't look like them, and that alone was enough to make her a target. Out of the corner of her eye, she noticed Sienna Blake entering the room with her usual entourage. The air shifted again, like it always did when Sienna walked in. She didn't just carry herself like a queen, she expected others to bow without being asked. Sienna's gaze flicked toward Kyra for just a heartbeat, cold and deliberate, before moving on. Mrs. Elkins continued the lesson, but Kyra barely registered the words. Her mind was occupied by the growing awareness that Sienna had already made a decision about her, and not just because she was new. Kyra had felt it in that stare. It wasn't curiosity. It wasn't interest. It was rejection. Not because of what she said. Not because of how she dressed. But because of what she represented. A black girl. From out of state. Quiet. Confident in a way that made people uncomfortable because she didn't beg for approval. It was that very confidence, that silence mixed with self-possession, that made her a threat in Sienna's world. And then came the whispers. By lunchtime, the rumor mill had already begun churning. "She's from Detroit, right? Looks like trouble. Bet her parents didn't even graduate high school." And then, louder. "She probably thinks she's better than us." Kyra walked into the cafeteria and felt the shift in energy the moment she crossed the threshold. The conversations didn't stop, but their tone changed, quieter, more targeted. She took her usual seat in the far corner, away from everyone. She didn't expect an invitation. She never did. And that was fine. But across the room, at the center table, Sienna Blake leaned in close to her friends and whispered with that same knowing smirk she wore like perfume. "I don't like the way she walks," she said softly, but clearly enough that nearby tables could hear. "Like she thinks she's better than all of us." Delaney let out a sharp laugh. "Please. She's just trying to act classy. Just because she's got that whole, urban vibe going on doesn't mean she's special." Paige added, it's always the quiet ones. They think silence makes them mysterious, but really it just makes them easy targets. The table burst into soft giggles. Kyra kept eating. But her grip on her fork tightened. She didn't need to hear the full conversation. The tone was enough. The racial subtext in their words wasn't even hidden, it was thinly veiled behind every joke, every insinuation. Urban vibe. Quiet ones. Doesn't belong. These were code words. She'd heard them before. At other schools, in other towns, under other smiles. The world always found a way to label girls like her. And when they couldn't understand her silence, they interpreted it as arrogance. Because they couldn't bear the idea that a black girl could carry herself with dignity in the face of isolation. Sienna wasn't just annoyed by Kyra's presence, she was threatened by it. Because Kyra didn't try to fit in. Because Kyra didn't bow. And because Kyra, without saying a word, disrupted the balance of power that Sienna had spent years building. Lunch at Ridgewood High had never felt so tense. Each day, Kyra Thompson entered the cafeteria with the same hope, that maybe today would be different. Maybe today she could sit, eat in peace, and not have to brace herself like a soldier walking into battle. But that hope was always crushed the moment she stepped into the blinding spotlight that had somehow been cast on her ever since the day she arrived. And at the center of that spotlight was always one person, Sienna Clark. Sienna had made it a routine now. Every lunch period was another chance to break Kyra down. What started with whispered insults had escalated into a full-blown campaign of humiliation. On the third day, Kyra had just taken a seat in the far corner of the cafeteria, clutching a modest tray of chicken nuggets, mashed potatoes, and a carton of milk. She had chosen the farthest table again, where she could see everything and everyone, but more importantly, where she hoped no one would come near her. But they did. Sienna strutted over, flanked by her usual crew, Maddie, with her fake laugh that cut like glass, and Talia, whose silence was just as cruel as Sienna's words. "Oh look, it's Miss Chicago again," Sienna smirked, making sure her voice was loud enough for at least two nearby tables to hear. "How's that slum cuisine of yours, Kyra? What is that, chicken scraps and white paste?" Laughter erupted around her. Kyra said nothing. She kept her head down, chewing slowly, refusing to give Sienna the satisfaction. But Sienna wasn't done. The next day, the torment escalated. Kyra had just sat down with a simple sandwich and apple when Sienna's group approached. Without warning, Sienna knocked over Kyra's milk carton. The pale liquid spilled across the table, soaking the brown paper bag Kyra had carefully packed that morning. "Oh no. My hand slipped," Sienna said, placing a mock-innocent hand on her chest. "Clumsy me." Kyra stared at the mess, jaw clenched. Her fingers tightened around the edge of the table, her knuckles whitening. But still, she said nothing. "Why don't you say something?" Maddie chimed in. "Or is it because you know you don't belong here?" That hit harder than any spilled milk. Kyra's silence was no longer about strength, it was now survival. The cafeteria, once a place of comfort, had turned into a gladiator arena. She was expected to either break or retaliate, and both options came with a price. On Friday, things got even worse. Sienna had somehow gotten hold of one of Kyra's old school photos, a middle school picture where Kyra wore oversized glasses and had her hair in a bun. It was awkward, harmless, and deeply personal. Sienna had printed dozens of copies, and by the time Kyra stepped into the cafeteria, they were everywhere, taped to tables, pinned to the wall, even one folded inside her tray. "She hasn't changed at all," Sienna said loud enough for everyone to hear. "Still a charity case. Still trash." The students around her didn't laugh this time. Some looked away, uncomfortable. A few even looked at Sienna with unease, but no one said a word. The fear of becoming her next target was too strong. Kyra stood in the middle of it all, the copies of her photo fluttering around like falling leaves. Her throat burned. Her chest tightened. But still, she didn't cry. Not here. Not in front of them. She picked up one of the photos, looked at it briefly, then crumpled it and walked straight out of the cafeteria without saying a word. Sienna watched her leave with a sneer on her lips, but even she noticed the silence left in Kyra's wake. Something about it wasn't right. There was no screaming. No tears. No retaliation. Only a silence so cold, so deliberate, it almost felt like a storm was quietly forming. The next few days were a slow, simmering descent into something much darker. Kyra had hoped the whispers would fade, that her silence would be enough to diffuse whatever interest Sienna Blake had in her. But she had underestimated how far someone like Sienna was willing to go when her sense of control was threatened. The first incident happened during gym. It was nothing dramatic. Just a casual accident. Kyra had just finished a solo set of warm-ups when Coach Harmon called everyone over to split into groups for relay drills. Sienna, of course, had the right to reassign anyone she wanted into different teams, at least unofficially. "Actually, Coach," she said with a sweet smile, "can Kyra be on our team? We'd love to see how fast she is. Heard people from Detroit have, like, street reflexes." A few of the girls laughed nervously. Kyra didn't say anything. She just nodded and jogged over. But her heart beat faster, and not because of the exercise. The drill began. It was simple: run the cone course, tag the next person. Kyra ran her leg flawlessly. Clean strides, perfect control. But as she turned to tag the next girl, Sienna, something happened. Sienna tripped. Or claimed to. She stumbled dramatically into Kyra's side, knocking both of them to the ground. There was a sharp gasp from the class. "She shoved me," Sienna exclaimed, brushing fake dirt from her leggings. Kyra sat up slowly, blinking in disbelief. "I didn't." But Coach Harmon was already shouting. "That's enough. No one's here to play dirty." Kyra opened her mouth to protest again, but stopped. Because the look in Coach Harmon's eyes wasn't just skepticism. It was something colder. He wasn't just doubtful. He was expecting her to be the problem. And that was when she understood, they'd already made up their minds. Later that day, in the locker room, she found her clothes missing from the bench where she had folded them. In their place was a wrinkled piece of notebook paper. "Detroit rats belong in the sewer." No name. No signature. Just venom, soaked in cowardice. Kyra sat on the cold metal bench, staring at the note. Her fists clenched around it so tightly that the paper tore. Her heart pounded with fury and humiliation, but still, she said nothing. She simply retrieved her clothes from the garbage can, changed quickly, and walked out. But the silence didn't make her safe. The next day, it was the cafeteria. Again. Kyra had just sat down when a tray dropped onto the table across from her. Food sloshed onto her lap. Mac and cheese. Deliberate. Sienna stood behind the tray with a perfectly apologetic smile. "Oh no," she cooed, drawing out the vowels like a taunt. "So sorry, didn't see you there." The cafeteria froze. Students turned. Some whispered. Others filmed. Kyra stood slowly, her pants stained, her jaw tight. But she didn't speak. Sienna leaned closer, her voice now a whisper only Kyra could hear. "You don't belong here. This school doesn't need your kind lowering the curve. Go back to wherever it is your type comes from." Kyra's body went still. Every part of her screamed to lash out, to say something, to fight. But she didn't. Not yet. Because her father had taught her better. Because she wasn't going to give them the reaction they wanted. But deep inside, something was cracking. Her silence had always been her shield, her way of surviving. But now it was starting to feel like a prison, and Sienna was shaking the bars, daring her to break. That night, Kyra sat on the worn leather couch at home, her arms wrapped around her knees. Her father, Jerome Thompson, watched her carefully. He'd seen this look before years ago, when Kyra came home bloodied and broken from a fight she hadn't wanted but couldn't avoid. He knew she had something to say, but couldn't find the words. "Talk to me," he said gently, his deep voice soft and steady. "You've been walking around like you're trying to disappear." Kyra didn't look at him at first. She just stared at the hardwood floor. Then quietly, she whispered, "They don't see me." "Not really. Just my skin. My silence. They think it means weakness." Jerome leaned forward. "You're not weak." "I know," she said. "But every time I hold back, every time I stay silent, I feel like I'm letting them decide who I am." A long pause. Then, Jerome said, "Baby, sometimes strength looks like silence. But sometimes when they cross that line you've got to let them see who you really are. With clarity. With fire." Kyra looked up, her eyes gleaming not with tears but with resolve. She was done watching her back. If they wanted to test her, they'd find out just how wrong they were. The final bell rang at 3:10 p.m. Kyra Thompson didn't move. She sat in her last period English class, staring down at her desk, the notes still tucked into her hoodie pocket. The words burned into her mind. After school. Behind the gym. Don't be a coward. She didn't need a signature to know who it was from. Sienna Blake wanted a show. And this time, she wanted the whole school to see her win. Kyra stood slowly, grabbing her bag, her breath steady. The room had already emptied, and in the hallway, the noise of excited whispers and heavy footsteps filled the space like static. Students weren't going home. They were heading to the back of the gym. Everyone had heard. The sky was heavy with clouds as Kyra rounded the corner behind the building. The back lot, usually silent, was now packed. Dozens of students circled around the empty space, phones already out, screens glowing. A few were even live-streaming. Kyra walked in, her face unreadable. No fear. No anger. Just focus. And then she saw her Sienna standing in the center like she owned the ground beneath her feet. Beside her were Brielle and Maddie, flanking her like always. But today, even they seemed slightly nervous, throwing unsure glances around the crowd. Sienna, however, wore a smirk carved from pure arrogance. "Took you long enough," she called out, loud enough for the crowd to hear. Kyra didn't respond. She stepped forward and dropped her bag on the ground. "I'm here," she said calmly. "That's what you wanted, right?" Sienna laughed mockingly. "Oh, I wanted more than this. I wanted the whole school to see how fake you are. You walk around all quiet like you're better than everyone. But you're not. You're just another charity case. Another angry black girl who thinks silence is power." A hush fell over the crowd. Kyra's face didn't change. But inside, something cracked. Not from anger but from clarity. "You don't hate me because I'm quiet," Kyra said, her voice firm. "You hate me because I make you question everything you think you deserve." Sienna's smirk faltered. "Don't flatter yourself. You're scared of me," Kyra continued, stepping closer. "Because you can't control me. And girls like you, bullies like you, only feel strong when everyone else stays small." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. A few students lowered their phones. This wasn't the fight they expected. Sienna's face turned red. "Enough," she hissed. She lunged. It wasn't graceful, it was rage. But Kyra had seen it coming. In a blink, she stepped aside, letting Sienna's momentum carry her forward. Kyra didn't strike back. She didn't need to. She turned, faced her again. "I'm not going to fight you," Kyra said. That's not strength. That's just noise. Sienna spun around, seething. You think this makes you look strong? Walking away? No, Kyra said quietly. But standing here, choosing who I am? That's power. And then Sienna did something no one expected. She threw a punch. It was wild. Reckless. But Kyra reacted instantly. She caught Sienna's wrist mid-air, turned her body, and used the girl's momentum against her. Sienna slammed into the ground with a thud. The crowd gasped. Kyra stepped back, releasing her gently. She didn't hurt her. She just let her know, once and for all, what real control looked like. Sienna scrambled to her feet, humiliated, eyes wide with disbelief. You think this changes anything? She spat. But she was trembling. Kyra leaned in, her voice a low whisper only Sienna could hear. It changes everything. No cheers. No applause. Just stunned silence. Because they all knew, this wasn't a fight. It was a reckoning. And Kyra Thompson had just rewritten the rules. The walk home felt longer than usual. Kyra's steps were steady, but her heart wasn't. The cold breeze brushed against her skin, but she barely noticed. Her mind was still back there behind the gym where everything had just ended. She had done it. She stood up. She didn't break. But she didn't feel victorious. Not yet. When she finally reached the front door of her house, an old two-story on Maple Street with peeling white paint and a crooked mailbox, her fingers hesitated on the handle. Her hand trembled slightly, betraying everything she'd tried to keep under control. Inside, the house was quiet. Her father, Darius Thompson, was in the garage, like always at this time of day, working the heavy bag or reorganizing his old medals and gloves. The muffled thud of a punch echoed faintly through the wall. Kyra stepped into the living room and dropped her backpack onto the worn-out couch. She stood still for a moment, her breath catching. And then, it hit her. All of it. The tension. The restraint. The fear she hadn't allowed herself to feel in front of everyone. Tears welled up in her eyes before she even realized they were coming. She sat down slowly, curling her knees to her chest, and buried her face in her arms. Her body shook not with sadness or regret but with the pressure that had finally found release. She didn't cry because she was weak. She cried because she had been strong for too long. And now the silence of the living room gave her permission to fall apart just a little. A few minutes later, heavy footsteps approached. Her father entered quietly, wiping sweat from his brow, his gym towel slung around his neck. He saw her curled up on the couch, her shoulders trembling ever so slightly. He didn't say anything at first. He just walked over, sat beside her, and waited. After a few seconds, Kyra looked up. Her eyes were red, but her voice was steady. "It's over," she said softly. Darius didn't ask what it was. He knew. He had felt it in the shift of the air the moment she walked into the house. He nodded slowly. "You all right?" Kyra hesitated. "I thought I would feel proud," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I just feel tired. Like I've been holding my breath for years." Darius leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "I know that feeling," he said, his voice low and warm. "You spend so much time trying not to be seen, trying to make yourself smaller so people don't pick you apart, and then one day, you decide not to shrink anymore. And when it's done, when you finally stand up, you're not sure who you are anymore." Kyra wiped her face, nodding slowly. "It wasn't just about the fight," she said. "It was everything before it. The looks. The whispers. The way they made me feel like being black meant I didn't belong. Like I had to earn space that should have been mine from the start." Darius exhaled deeply. "You did earn it," he said. "But not because you fought Sienna. You earned it the moment you chose to stay true to yourself even when the world tried to break you down. Kyra turned to him. Her eyes were fierce beneath the tears. I didn't want to be a symbol, Dad. I just wanted to be left alone. I know, he replied gently. But sometimes, the quiet ones end up becoming symbols anyway because they show everyone what real strength looks like. There was silence between them again. But this time, it wasn't heavy. It was peaceful. A kind of quiet Kyra hadn't felt in months. She rested her head on her father's shoulder. I didn't want to hurt anybody, she whispered. You didn't, he said. You protected yourself. And you taught a lesson no fists ever could. Outside, the sun began to break through the clouds. The world moved on. But inside that small, worn-down house, something profound had shifted. Kyra Thompson had faced the storm. Not with violence. Not with hate. But with quiet strength. And now, for the first time in a long while, she felt free. Would you like me to write a post-school impact story where Kyra becomes a symbol and the bullies face consequences? Or would you like a story about Kyra helping other students later? You said. Continue writing the after effects at school. ChatGPT said. Great, ha. Here's the aftermath at school, where the fallout from the confrontation is felt throughout the hallways. A sea change is felt, not just in the eyes of the students, but in the way Brooklyn Central High sees itself. Monday morning came with an unusual stillness. The hallway of Brooklyn Central High, usually buzzing with gossip and laughter, now hummed with something else, caution. Kyra Thompson walked through the front entrance with her head held high. Not cocky. Not triumphant. Just calm. Her steps were quiet, but her presence was louder than ever. No one blocked her path. No one whispered as she passed. They looked, yes, how could they not? But this time, the stares weren't laced with ridicule. They were laced with something new. Respect. Even awe. She reached her locker and turned the combination with practiced ease. The same hallway where she used to feel like an outsider now felt different. Not safe, not completely. But stable. Behind her, whispers still floated, but they weren't about how she dressed or how she spoke. Now it was, that's the girl who took down Sienna. She didn't even raise her voice. Zane didn't even touch her, he couldn't. She moved like a shadow, bro. Like a ghost with fists. Some said it with admiration. Some with fear. But none dared say it with mockery. Further down the hallway, the mood was colder. Sienna Remington sat at her usual bench near the science wing, but this time, no one joined her. No Brielle. No Chloe. No Zane. Her empire had crumbled. Zane walked by her without a glance, a bruise still visible on his cheek. Chloe had changed her seat in chemistry. Brielle had been caught spreading the note that started it all and was suspended for 3 days. But the worst part? Nobody was afraid of her anymore. A group of freshman girls passed by Sienna without flinching. One even smiled politely. She felt it a crack in the mirror. The control she once had was gone, and what remained was the silence of isolation. She looked across the hallway, and saw Kyra. Standing alone. But not lonely. Surrounded by nothing yet more powerful than Sienna had ever been. And that terrified her. Later that day in the cafeteria, the unspoken rules were tested again. Kyra walked in holding her tray. She paused at the entrance, scanning the room. Her usual table far corner, near the vending machine, was empty, as always. But now, something strange happened. One by one, students began to stand. A boy from her English class waved shyly. Hey, Kyra. Want to sit here? A girl from gym class scooted over. You can have this spot. Even a couple of juniors who once snickered at her offered a seat. Kyra gave them a small smile. She wasn't trying to be a leader. But that's exactly why people were looking to her. Because she didn't want to be feared. She didn't want to control anyone. She just stood her ground. That was enough. She chose the quiet spot again, but this time, 3 girls followed and sat with her. They didn't ask questions. They didn't force small talk. They just sat. And for the first time, Kyra didn't mind the company. The teachers noticed. Mr. Davidson, her history teacher, called her into his classroom during lunch. "I saw what happened," he said, his voice hesitant but sincere. "The administration is reviewing everything." He paused. "You did what no adult in this school could do. You made them stop." Kyra didn't answer. She didn't need praise. But his eyes softened, and he continued. "I just want you to know, if you ever need anything, my door's open." That moment lingered with her. Because for the first time, an adult believed her without asking her to explain herself. By the end of the week, Brooklyn Central High had changed. The whispers shifted. "We should have said something sooner. I wish I'd stood with her before." Kyra didn't just fight. She changed the way people see us. A girl named Tamika, a freshman who'd been picked on since day one, walked through the hallway with her head up, no longer hiding behind her hoodie. Another boy, Malik, wore his natural curls proudly instead of hiding them under a cap. Something had rippled out from Kyra's stand. Not a wave. Not a rebellion. But a quiet uprising. Made of stares that finally saw truth. Of voices that learned silence can be power. And Kyra? She didn't speak much. She didn't start clubs. She didn't give speeches. She just kept walking. And the school kept shifting with every step. A week had passed since the showdown behind the gym. But the shockwaves were still rolling through Brooklyn Central High. Kyra Thompson had become a name everyone knew. Not because she wanted to be known, but because she'd done what so many only dreamed of. She said, "Enough." And people had heard her, even the ones who hadn't spoken in years. It started with Malik Jones, a quiet sophomore who wore oversized hoodies and headphones every day just to disappear. He had been the target of cruel jokes for months: his stutter, his secondhand sneakers, his darker skin. One morning, Kyra found a crumpled note stuffed in her locker. No name. Just shaky handwriting. "How did you do it? I can't breathe in this school." Her heart clenched. At lunch, she found Malik sitting alone by the vending machine where she once used to sit. Kyra didn't say much. She didn't ask him to speak. She just sat. And after 5 minutes of silence, Malik took off one earbud and whispered, "I saw what you did to Zane. I didn't know we were allowed to fight back." Kyra looked at him, her voice steady. "We've always been allowed. They just taught us to forget." That moment was the start of something bigger. Next was Naomi Ellis. A junior with vitiligo and a fierce love for poetry, but she'd stopped reading in class after students laughed at her patchy skin. Kyra saw Naomi scribbling in her notebook near the library steps after school. She walked over, not to pry, just to listen. Naomi flinched at first. Years of invisible ridicule will do that to a girl. But Kyra knelt down and gently said, "I heard you used to write poems so good they made Miss Callahan cry." Naomi blinked. "Who told you that?" Kyra smiled. She did. The next week, Naomi stood in front of her English class and read a poem titled, "Brown Isn't Broken." And not one person laughed. Some clapped. Some wiped tears. But all of them listened. Soon, whispers of courage spread like wildfire. Daryl, who'd been shoved into lockers for sounding too white. Lucia, mocked for her accent and lunchbox food. Jalen, a trans boy whose name had been disrespected every day in attendance call. Kyra didn't start a movement. She didn't post on social media or wear a cape. She simply stood beside the ones no one had ever stood beside before. One hallway at a time. One quiet act of defiance at a time. She didn't need to speak loudly to make an impact. Her silence had already taught people enough. But when she did speak, when she offered her voice, it cut through the noise like thunder. One Friday afternoon, the principal, Mr. Lattimore, made an announcement over the intercom. Due to recent events, the school will be hosting an open forum next Thursday. Students who wish to share their experiences, or speak about inclusion and respect, are invited to sign up anonymously. Kyra's name was the first on the list. But not for herself. She signed up so others wouldn't be afraid to do the same. The day of the forum, the auditorium was full. Students sat with fidgeting hands, lowered gazes, and shallow breaths. Most had never seen a microphone up close. Kyra took the stage in a black hoodie and jeans, nothing flashy. No applause greeted her. Just silence. She looked across the crowd and said, "I was never the one who was supposed to speak. I used to believe silence was survival. But silence can also be a weapon if you choose when and how to use it. I didn't fight because I'm brave. I fought because I got tired of shrinking." Her voice didn't shake. You don't have to scream. You don't have to throw punches. But if someone's hurting you physically, emotionally, racially, any way, you don't owe them your silence. Find your people. And if you don't have any, I'll be yours. That last line was met with something stronger than applause. It was met with belief. After that, the hallways of Brooklyn Central started to shift again. Teachers began listening more carefully. Students began watching out for each other. And bullies, for the first time, were scared. Not of fists. Not of Kyra. But of a truth they could no longer suppress. The kids they targeted weren't afraid anymore. Kyra Thompson didn't become the queen of the school. She didn't want that crown. It never fit her anyway. But she did become something else. A symbol. Not of power. Not of vengeance. But of quiet resistance. And the strength to say, "I deserve to be here. Just as I am." A few days after the school forum, Kyra stayed behind at the gym late into the evening. Coach Ramirez, the PE teacher, had asked her if she'd be willing to help teach self-defense basics to a few students who had quietly approached him. At first, she hesitated. But then she remembered the note Malik Jones left her. The silence Naomi had carried. The bruises Lucia had hidden under her sleeves. "Okay," Kyra said simply. "Let's do it." The next day, the gym buzzed with nervous energy. 10 students showed up, some curious, some terrified. Kyra stepped into the center mat, her voice calm and reassuring. "I'm not here to turn you into fighters," she said. "I'm here to help you stop being afraid." She showed them basic stances. How to fall safely. How to stay grounded when someone tried to shove you. Nothing fancy. Just survival skills. But one of the students, Bryce Chen, raised his hand. "Where did you learn all this?" he asked, eyes wide with wonder. Kyra paused. A flicker of something unreadable crossed her face. She looked toward the back of the gym, where, unbeknownst to her, someone had been watching through the small window of the office door. That evening, at home, Kyra sat across from her father, Julian Thompson, at the dinner table. He was pouring hot sauce onto his ribs, as he always did, completely calm. But Kyra couldn't shake the question Bryce had asked. "Dad," she said finally, "why did you teach me all of this?" Julian raised an eyebrow, chewing thoughtfully. "You know why," he said. "So you could defend yourself." "No, I mean, how do you know it? Who taught you?" Julian chuckled. "That's a long story." Kyra leaned forward. "Tell me." There was a pause. And then, for the first time, her father spoke words she'd never heard before. I wasn't always a mechanic, Kyra. Back in the day, I was known as the Golden Panther. She blinked. What? Julian stood up and disappeared into the garage. When he returned, he carried an old, weathered case. He opened it slowly. Inside was a golden medal glinting under the light. The inscription read, International Martial Arts Championship, Gold Medalist, Julian Golden Panther Thompson, 1998 Tokyo Open. Kyra stared at it, mouth slightly open. You were famous? Julian smiled, rubbing the back of his neck. Yeah. For a while. I traveled the world. Fought in front of thousands. Broke records. Won medals. Even turned down a Hollywood movie or two. Kyra's mind raced. You never told me. I didn't want to, he said simply. Fame makes people see you for what you were, not who you are. I just wanted to raise you quietly. Let you become strong on your own. But why hide it even now? Julian grew serious. Because the power I wanted to teach you wasn't in punches. It was in knowing when not to use them. 2 days later, during Kyra's self-defense session, Coach Ramirez surprised her by inviting a special guest. When the gym doors opened, in walked a tall, broad-shouldered man in a dark jacket and baseball cap. Kyra's jaw dropped. It was her father. But not the quiet mechanic version. Today, he stood tall with the stance of a champion. And the moment he stepped into the light, gasps echoed around the gym. Bryce, who was obsessed with martial arts videos, practically screamed. Wait, are you the Golden Panther? Like the real one? Julian chuckled. That's what they used to call me. Word spread like wildfire. Within hours, the entire school knew. Kyra Thompson's father wasn't just any dad. He was a legend. The next morning, Kyra walked into school and something had changed. The stairs weren't laced with pity or fear. They were filled with awe. Respect. Even the most arrogant seniors guys who once laughed when she walked by stepped aside for her in the hallway. Zane and his crew? Silent. No sarcastic remarks. No challenges, just eyes lowered. And yet, Kyra didn't smile. She didn't flaunt. Because she understood something important. Power didn't come from medals. It came from integrity. And that's what her father had passed on, not through trophies or fame, but through every word of restraint. Every lesson in self-control. After school, Kyra met her father outside the gym. Students waved as they walked past him. Some even asked for pictures. Julian grinned, embarrassed. I guess I'm out of hiding now. Kyra smiled softly. You never hid from me. Julian looked at her for a long moment. You're stronger than I ever was, he said. No, Kyra replied, slipping her hand into his. I just had the best teacher. The announcement came over the intercom on a crisp Thursday morning. Attention all students and faculty, there will be a mandatory assembly in the auditorium this afternoon at 2 p.m. Attendance is required. The voice of Principal Aldridge was unusually solemn. Whispers quickly rippled through the hallways. What's going on? Did something happen? Is this about Kyra? It was. And Kyra Thompson knew it. She had been called to the principal's office earlier that morning, this time not as a suspect, not as a disturbance, but as the reason for something much bigger. When she entered the office, Principal Aldridge stood from behind his desk and greeted her with both hands, voice calm and sincere. Kyra, he said, this school owes you something we can never fully repay. But we intend to try. At 2 p.m., the auditorium was packed. Over 800 students. Teachers. Staff. Even a few local journalists had been invited to document the event. On the stage stood a podium flanked by the school's banner, and behind it, a massive screen projecting a slideshow of photos from recent weeks, shots of Kyra teaching self-defense, helping classmates, and standing tall despite adversity. Principal Aldridge stepped up to the microphone. His voice echoed through the hall. "We are gathered here today to acknowledge a grave mistake. Not just by a few students, but by an entire system that allowed silence to fester in the face of injustice." Murmurs filled the room. Kyra sat in the front row, her face calm but her heart pounding. "Today," Aldridge continued, "we publicly recognize and honor Kyra Thompson not only for her courage, but for her extraordinary strength in the face of targeted bullying, prejudice, and isolation. We failed to protect her. And for that, we are truly sorry." He turned toward Kyra. "Kyra, on behalf of Brooklyn Ridge High School, its administration, faculty, and student body, we offer you a formal apology." The auditorium fell completely silent. Every eye turned to Kyra. She stood slowly, walked toward the stage. And as she reached the podium, the students, those who once laughed, whispered, doubted, rose to their feet and began to applaud. It wasn't just polite clapping. It was thunderous. Long, raw. From the heart. Kyra blinked quickly to hold back tears. She gripped the microphone tightly. When she finally spoke, her voice was clear, steady, full of both hurt and hope. "You all saw me. But you didn't see me. You heard the whispers. The laughs. Some of you joined them. Some of you stood by. But I didn't break. Because my father taught me that real strength is quiet." The crowd was frozen. "I'm not here to be anyone's queen. I'm not here to be feared. I just want to live in a school where no one ever has to feel invisible again." There were tears in the audience. And then, one by one, several students began to stand and step forward. Zane Carrington, the first boy who ever shoved her locker closed. Emily, who had shared Kyra's private messages in a group chat. Brandon Reyes, who once laughed when she spilled her lunch. They walked up, eyes lowered, and stopped in front of her. Zane spoke first, voice barely audible. "Kyra. I'm sorry I was wrong. And I was weak." He turned to the crowd. We all were. One by one, they offered apologies. Some stammered. Some cried. Kyra looked at them all, not with rage, not with superiority, but with the same quiet dignity that had carried her through every painful day. She nodded. Accepted each apology with grace. Because forgiveness, she had learned, was its own kind of power. Later that afternoon, the school unveiled a new initiative, the Kyra Thompson Scholarship Fund, a yearly award for students who demonstrated resilience and leadership in the face of adversity. In front of the entire auditorium, Principal Aldridge handed Kyra a certificate. "Your strength has changed this school forever." Then, something unexpected happened. Julian Thompson, Kyra's father, was invited on stage. A slide showed his gold medal. His years as the Golden Panther. Gasps echoed through the hall as students made the connection. And yet Julian only bowed slightly and stepped back, allowing his daughter to take the spotlight. Because this was her moment. And no spotlight in the world could outshine it. Outside the auditorium, as students returned to class, a new atmosphere swept through Brooklyn Ridge High. Old lines had been erased. New voices were being heard. And for the first time in years, hope felt possible.